Today we honor Willard Richards and his families. Willard Richards was born June 24, 1804, at Hopkinton, Middlesex County, Massachusetts. Upon the roll of honored names whose records as pioneers and state builders make up the early history of our Commonwealth, few shine as luminously as that of Willard Richards, physician, theologian, historian, journalist, and statesman. A member of the historic band led by Brigham Young from the Missouri River to Salt Lake Valley in 1847. From that time until the day of his death, he was intimately associated with the great man in the arduous and stupendous labor of establishing the feet of his people in their newfound home in the wilderness, in carving out of the desert and the rock of state, whose sovereign star is 45th in the flag of the Union. Dr. Richards was Secretary of the Provisional Government of Deseret, and after the organization of the Territory of Utah, for several years did most of the business of the Territorial Secretary, at the same time presiding over the council branch of the Legislative Assembly. During the last 6 years of his life, he was one of the first presidency in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, holding simultaneously the office of church historian.
Willard Richards was not only a pioneer of Utah, he was also the pioneer in Mormonism of a numerous and distinguished family, numbering among its members some of the foremost citizens of the state. An apostle of the church from April 1840, he shared with John Taylor, also an apostle, the tragic horror of being a fellow prisoner with Joseph and Hiram Smith when they fell pierced with the bullets of assassins in Carthage jail. On that occasion, when the bodies of the two martyrs, with that of Apostle Taylor, were riddled with balls, one of the missiles grazed Willard's neck, carrying away the tip of his left ear. Otherwise he was unhurt, though right in the midst of the massacre. He was a close friend and confidant of the prophet, and acted in the capacity of his private secretary up to the very moment of the martyrdom. He was the youngest of 11 children, whose parents were Joseph and Rhoda Howe Richards. His elder brothers, Phineas and Levi, who followed him into the church and also came to Utah, were both able and worthy men. His father was a Revolutionary soldier, and in time of peace a fairly well-to-do New England farmer. He and his wife belonged to the Congregational Church in Hopkinton, but their children were reared mostly under Presbyterian influences. When Willard was about 9 years old, the family removed to Richmond in Berkshire County, where his previous training in the common schools was supplemented with courses of instruction in the high school at that place. From the religious teachings of his parents, he was the subject of religious impressions from his early childhood. He witnessed several sectarian revivals and offered himself to the Congregational Church at Richmond at the age of 17, having previously passed the painful ordeal of conviction and conversion, even to the belief that he had committed the unpardonable sin. The total disregard of that church to his request for admission led him to a more thorough investigation of the principles of religion, when he became convinced that the sects were all wrong and that God had no church on the earth, but that he would soon have a church whose creed would be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. From that time he kept himself aloof from sectarian influence, boldly declaring his belief to all who wished to learn his views until the summer of 1835.
At the early age of 16, he taught school at Chatham, Columbia County, New York, and subsequently had charge of schools at Lanesboro, Massachusetts, and other places. He had an active and penetrating mind and was given to scientific investigation. In his leisure hours he studied medicine, electricity, and other kindred subjects, delivering lectures thereon. In 1834, he entered the Thomsonian Infirmary at Boston and practiced under Dr. Samuel Thompson, founder of the Botanic or Thomsonian School of Medicine. Next year he practiced his profession at Holliston, Massachusetts, where he resided at the home of Albert P. Rockwood.
It was here that Mormonism found him. Though susceptible to religious influences from childhood, he had paid but little attention to churches and creeds, and had supposed at one time that his indifference to such things was due to a reprobate condition of mind. In his despair he feared that he had committed the unpardonable sin. A great light burst upon him, he says, when in the summer of 1835 he read the Book of Mormon, a copy of which had been left by his cousin Brigham Young with another cousin, Lucius Parker, at Southborough. Up to this time Willard had never seen a Latter-day Saint, and his knowledge of them amounted to nothing more than that a boy named Joe Smith somewhere out west had found a gold Bible. Opening the book at random, he had read less than half a page of its contents when he declared, God or the devil had a hand in that book, for man never wrote it. He read it twice through in about 10 days, and was so impressed that he immediately resolved to visit the headquarters of the church, 700 miles distant, and give Mormonism a thorough investigation. The execution of his purpose was delayed by an attack of palsy until October of the year following, when he arrived at Kirtland, Ohio, in company with his brother, Dr. Levi Richards, who attended him as physician. They were cordially received and entertained by their cousin Brigham Young, who was one of the 12 apostles, with whom he tarried and gave the work an unceasing and untiring investigation until December 31, 1836. Willard was baptized at sunset on the last day of December, 1836, Brigham Young officiating in the ceremony, which was also witnessed by Heber C. Kimball and others who had spent the afternoon cutting the ice in order to prepare for the baptism. He was ordained an elder by Alva Beeman, March 6, 1837. Having formed a partnership with Brigham Young, he accompanied him on a special business trip to the East, from which he returned June 11th. On the day following, he was blessed and set apart by the prophet Joseph Smith to accompany Heber C. Kimball, Orson Hyde, Joseph Fielding, and others on a mission to England. They started on June 13th.
Having arrived safely in England, the gospel door having been successfully opened in Preston, Dr. Richards was sent to Bedford and surrounding country, where he labored with much success, notwithstanding bitter opposition. He returned to Preston in February 1838, and on April 1st attended a general conference, where he was ordained a high priest and appointed first counselor to Joseph Fielding, who was appointed to preside over the mission after Apostles Kimball and Hyde returned to America in April 1838. They left Joseph Fielding, Willard Richards, and William Clayton in charge of the British mission.
While in England, Willard met Miss Jeanette Richards, daughter of the Reverend John Richards, independent minister at Walkerfold, Chegley, Lancashire. The young lady had been converted to Mormonism by Heber C. Kimball, who, after baptizing her, met his friend, who had never yet seen her, and said, "Willard, I baptized your wife today." Some time later, Willard, having formed Jeanette's acquaintance, remarked to her, "Richards is a good name. I never want to change it. Do you, Jeanetta?" "No, I do not," she replied, "and I think I never will." A few months later, September 24, 1838, they were married. Their first child, a son named Heber John, died suddenly soon after his birth. Another son was born to them October 11, 1840, and him they also named Heber John. During the following year, he continued his missionary labors in Manchester, Bolston, Salford, Burslem, Preston, and other places. After the arrival of the apostles from America, Dr. Richards was ordained one of the 12 apostles April 14, 1840, at Preston, to which high and holy position he had been called by direct revelation by President Brigham Young, assisted by others of the 12, then upon their first mission as a quorum in foreign lands. He had been called to the apostleship by revelation July 8, 1838. Willard assisted his brother apostles in their great work of broadening and strengthening the foundations of the British mission. For a while he edited the Millennial Star, then published at Manchester during the temporary absence of Parley P. Pratt, who had returned to America for his family, and also performed the general duties of presiding over the mission. In February 1841, he removed his family from Preston to Manchester, and in the following April left England with other of the 12 to return to Nauvoo. Returning across the Atlantic in May 1841, Apostle Richards visited his old home in Massachusetts, and leaving his family in care of his sisters there, his parents had both died while he was in England, he proceeded on to Nauvoo, Illinois, where he arrived August 16th. Agreeable to the Council of the 12, he located temporarily at Warsaw, Hancock County, Illinois, for a short time, where he sold lands for the church, received immigrants, and counseled the saints who had settled in that part, at the same time attending to his other duties as a general officer of the church. October 30, 1841, he was elected a member of the City Council of Nauvoo, and on December 11th removed to that place. It had previously been voted by the apostles in council that he should take charge of the publication of the times and seasons.
2 days after his arrival at Nauvoo, December 13th, he was appointed by the prophet to be his private secretary. He also became his general clerk, the recorder for the temple and for the city council, and clerk of the municipal court. He commenced his labors in Joseph's office, with the exception of a short mission to the east after his family. "He is a great prop to me in my labors," wrote the prophet to Willard's wife while she was still in Massachusetts. He was continually at work with his pen while he was able to sit up. He was recorder of the city council and clerk of the municipal court, and kept Joseph Smith's private journals, making an entry only a few minutes previous to the awful tragedy at Carthage, the tragedy that terminated the earthly life of his beloved leader, Joseph Smith.
When the prophet, in the absence of most of the apostles, felt the toils gathering round him, and knew that his only safety lay in flight from the murderous mobs that were thirsting for his blood, Willard Richards was one of those who, on the night of June 22, 1844, crossed the Mississippi with him in a skiff and started for the Rocky Mountains. When, yielding to the importunities of faint-hearted friends, Joseph returned and surrendered himself into the power of the wretches who had planned his destruction, Willard still clung to him, and was imprisoned with him, his brother Hiram, and John Taylor in Carthage jail. Just before the murder of the two brothers, their jailer having suggested, in view of certain rumors, that they would be safer in the cell of the prison than in the apartment they then occupied, the prophet said to Dr. Richards, "If we go into the cell, will you go in with us?" The doctor answered, "Brother Joseph, you did not ask me to cross the river with you. You did not ask me to come to Carthage. You did not ask me to come to jail with you. And do you think I will forsake you now? But I will tell you what I will do. If you are condemned to be hung for treason, I will be hung in your stead, and you shall go free." Joseph said, "You cannot." The doctor replied, "I will." His subsequent experience in the prison, when it was assaulted by the band of blackened assassins who imbrued their hands in the blood of the prophet and the patriarch, is graphically told in his own thrilling narrative, originally published in the Times and Seasons. In the face of 100 muskets in the hands of infuriated mobbers, he thrust his head out of the window to catch a glimpse of his dying president, and there remained gazing intently upon the mangled body until he was satisfied that the innocent spirit had fled.
His 2 minutes in jail is one of the most thrilling documents ever written. His parrying muskets with a walking stick is one of the most unequal contests on record. God preserved him with the loss of a drop of blood and without a hole in his robe.
2 minutes in jail. Possibly the following events occupied near 3 minutes, but I think only about 2, and I have penned them for the gratification of many friends. Carthage, June 27, 1844. A shower of musket balls were thrown up the stairway against the door of the prison in the 2nd story, followed by many rapid footsteps. While Generals Joseph and Hiram Smith, Mr. Taylor, and myself were in the front chamber, closed the door of our room against the entry at the head of the stairs, and placed ourselves against it, there being no lock on the door and no catch that was usable. The door is a common panel, and as soon as we heard the feet at the stairs head, a ball was sent through the door, which passed between us and showed that our enemies were desperadoes, and we must change our position. General Joseph Smith, Mr. Taylor, and myself sprang back to the front part of the room, and General Hiram Smith retreated 2/3 across the chamber in front of and facing the door. A ball was sent through the door which hit Hiram on the side of the nose, when he fell backwards, extended at length, without moving his feet. From the holes in his vest, the day was warm and no one had their coats on but myself, pantaloons, drawers, and shirts, it appeared evident that a ball must have been thrown from without through the window, which entered his back on the right side, and passing through lodged against his watch, which was in his right vest pocket, completely pulverizing the crystal and face, tearing off the hands and mashing the whole body of the watch. At the same time the ball from the door entered his nose. As he struck the floor, he exclaimed emphatically, "I'm a dead man." Joseph looked towards him and responded, "Oh dear, Brother Hiram," and opening the door 2 or 3 inches with his left hand, discharged one barrel of a 6-shooter pistol at random in the entry, from whence a ball grazed Hiram's breast, and entering his throat, passed into his head, while other muskets were aimed at him, and some balls hit him. Joseph continued snapping his revolver round the casing of the door into the space as before, 3 barrels of which misfired, while Mr. Taylor with a walking stick stood by his side and knocked down the bayonets and muskets which were constantly discharging through the doorway, while I stood by him ready to lend any assistance with another stick, but could not come within striking distance without going directly before the muzzles of the guns. When the revolver failed, we had no more firearms, and expected an immediate rush of the mob, and the doorway full of muskets halfway in the room, and no hope but instant death from within. Mr. Taylor rushed into the window, which is some 15 or 20 feet from the ground. When his body was nearly on a balance, a ball from the door within entered his leg, and a ball from without struck his watch, a patent lever in his vest pocket near the left breast, and smashed it into pie, leaving the hand standing at 5 o'clock, 16 minutes and 26 seconds, the force of which ball threw him back at the floor, and he rolled under the bed which stood by his side, where he lay motionless, the mob from the door continuing to fire upon him, cutting away a piece of flesh from his left hip as large as a man's hand, and were hindered only by my knocking down their muzzles with a stick, while they continued to reach their guns into the room, probably left-handed, and aimed their discharge so far round as almost to reach us in the corner of the room, to where we retreated and dodged, and then I recommenced the attack with my stick. Joseph attempted as the last resort to leap the same window from whence Mr. Taylor fell, when 2 balls pierced him from the door, and one entered the right breast from without, and he fell outward, exclaiming, "O Lord, my God!" As his feet went out of the window, my head went in, the balls whistling all around. He fell on his left side, a dead man. At this instant the cry was raised, "He's leaped the window!" and the mob on the stairs and in the entry ran out. I withdrew from the window, thinking it of no use to leap out on 100 bayonets, then around General Smith's body. Not satisfied with this, I again reached my head out of the window, and watched some seconds to see if there were any signs of life, regardless of my own, determined to see the end of him I loved. Being fully satisfied that he was dead, with 100 men near the body and more coming round the corner of the jail, and expecting a return to our room, I rushed towards the prison door at the head of the stairs, and through the entry from whence the firing had proceeded, to learn if the door into the prison were open. When near the entry, Mr. Taylor cried out, "Take me!" I pressed my way until I found all doors unbarred. Returning instantly, caught Mr. Taylor under my arm, and rushed by the stairs into the dungeon or inner prison, stretched him on the floor, and covered him with a bed in such a manner as not likely to be perceived, expecting an immediate return of the mob. I said to Mr. Taylor, "This is a hard case to lay you on the floor, but if your wounds are not fatal, I want you to live to tell the story." I expected to be shot the next moment, and stood before the door, awaiting the onset. The expected almost happened. While Willard was caring for his wounded friend in the inner part of the prison, a portion of the mob again rushed up the stairs to finish the fiendish work already more than half completed. Finding only the dead body of Hiram Smith in the front apartment, and supposing the other prisoners to have escaped, they were again descending the stairs when a loud cry was heard, "The Mormons are coming!" Thinking the inhabitants of Nauvoo were upon them to avenge the murder of the prophet, the whole band of assassins broke and fled, seeking refuge in the neighboring forest. Their groundless fear was shared by the people of Carthage in general, who fled pell-mell, terrified by the thought of a wrathful visitation from the betrayed and stricken community.
Dr. Richards' marvelous escape from death in the midst of the fiery shower to which his three friends succumbed fulfilled the prediction made to him by the prophet over a year previously, when he told him that the time would come when the balls would fly round him like hail, and that he would see his friends fall upon the right and upon the left, but there would not be a hole in his garment. As during that terrible ordeal he was a personification of calm courage and collected heroism, so in the events immediately following he manifested the highest wisdom and discretion. Riding from Carthage to Nauvoo, he advised the people to be patient, to trust in God, and not seek to avenge themselves upon their enemies. He and the prophet's brother Samuel H. Smith, with the wounded John Taylor, then superintended the removal of the bodies of the martyrs to Nauvoo for burial. During the catastrophe of Joseph and Hiram's death and the emergency into which the church was suddenly thrown, Dr. Richards felt the burden of giving directions to the affairs of the church in Hancock County in consequence of the absence of the 12 apostles. Though standing in the midst of the murderous mob at Carthage, with the mangled bodies of his martyred friends and that of Elder Taylor under his charge, his letters and counsels at that time indicated great self-command and judgment. His ability was happily commensurate with such an occasion. In all subsequent movements of the church, Willard Richards was a recognized power. He assisted in the inauguration and conduct of the exodus from Illinois, helped to raise the Mormon battalion on the Missouri River, and was the first enrolled among the pioneers accompanying Brigham Young to the Rocky Mountains.
After the return of the apostles to winter quarters, when the first presidency was again organized, December 27, 1847, Willard Richards was chosen second counselor to President Brigham Young, in which capacity he continued to act until his death. In the fall of 1848, he arrived in the valley a second time as captain of a large company of saints. As a civil officer, he served as secretary to the government of the state of Deseret and did the greatest share of the business of the Secretary of the Territory of Utah after its organization as a territory, and presided over the Council of the Legislative Assembly for about the same period. He was also postmaster of Great Salt Lake City up to the time of his death, and enjoyed the full confidence of the Postmaster General, who respected his judgment touching postal arrangements throughout the mountain territories. He was an efficient member of the Perpetual Emigrating Fund Company, whose duties affected the interest and gathering of tens of thousands. In the quorum of the first presidency, he magnified his high calling to the day of his death, ever shedding light and consolation in his sphere upon the minds of thousands and tens of thousands to whom he ministered. He was the editor and proprietor of the Deseret News, also general historian of the whole church, and church recorder, for which offices he was eminently gifted. He chronicled events, dates, circumstances, and incidents with rare accuracy of judgment and great tenacity of memory. The number of offices which he held at the time of his death indicate the confidence which the church reposed in his great integrity and varied ability. That ardent love of truth and intuitive perception of the same, which impelled him to investigate the claims of the everlasting gospel in the beginning, grew with his passing years and became more and more manifest by his unwavering and unflinching adherence to it in the most perilous and troublesome times of the church history in after life. He possessed a calm and even mind, and yet was rather reserved. From being familiar with the minutiae of the medical profession and a careful observer of clerical deportment and a handsome proficient in science generally, the change that swept over his past attainments and brought him down to the altar of revelation by the Holy Ghost showed forth the reality of a new birth personified in all his subsequent life. On great and rare occasions his masterly energies came forth like a well-disciplined and invincible troop that knew their place and prerogative to act in defense of truth.
At the election held for officers of the Provisional Government of Deseret, March 12, 1849, Willard Richards was chosen Secretary of State and served as such until the organization by Congress of the Territory of Utah and the arrival of the Territorial Secretary B.D. Harris of Vermont, who did not reach Salt Lake City until late in July 1851. After the summary departure of Mr. Harris in September of that year, Dr. Richards again took up the burden of the secretary's business, if indeed he had laid it down, and continued to carry it for another year or more when Secretary Benjamin G. Ferris arrived upon the scene. Again, after that official's premature departure, Dr. Richards was secretary ad interim. June 15, 1850 witnessed the publication of the first number of the Deseret News, of which Willard Richards was editor and proprietor. The news was then in small quarto, issued weekly, but what it lacked in size it made up in vigor, thanks to the pungent pen of the ready writer occupying the editorial sanctum. He continued to edit the news as long as he lived. His incumbency of the position of postmaster covered about the same period. He had the confidence of the Postmaster General, who respected his judgment touching postal arrangements through the mountain territories.
September 22, 1851, the first Legislative Assembly of the Territory of Utah convened at Salt Lake City. Willard Richards was a member of the council. In 1852, he presided over that body and succeeded himself at the two following sessions of the legislature, which then met annually. The last time that he left his house, a retired little cottage on Richard Street, and then only a few rods from the council house where the legislature convened, it was to discharge his duty as president of the council on the final day of the session ending January 20, 1854. In his effort to walk these few rods from his residence, he said to a bystander, "I will go and perform this last duty, if like John Quincy Adams I die in the attempt." He was suffering from dropsy. Dr. Richards magnified to the last, along with his other duties, his office as one of the first presidency of the church, enjoying to the full the love and confidence of Presidents Young and Kimball, his associates. The latter once said of him, referring to his humility and deferential regard for his seniors, "He would never so much as go through a doorway ahead of me." President Richards, in other words, was a gentleman. His death in the prime of life was regarded, in view of his many gifts and general usefulness, as a public calamity. Beloved and respected by all who knew him, Dr. Willard Richards died in Salt Lake City, March 11, 1854, from palsy, which disease had preyed upon his system ever since he began to investigate the Book of Mormon.
He was married September 24th, 1838, to Jeanette Richards at Preston, Lancashire, England. She was born August 21st, 1817, at Walkerfold, Lancashire, England, and christened Jeanette, not Janetta, by her father at the Independent Chapel at Walkerfold. She bore him 3 children.
Heber John Richards was born July 17, 1839, at Preston, near Chegley, Lancashire, England, and died December 28, 1839, aged 6 months, at Preston, and was buried in the Elswick Chapel Cemetery. Their second child, who was also named Heber John Richards, was born October 11, 1840, at Manchester, Lancashire, England, and was married April 9, 1862, in the Endowment House to Mary Julia Johnson. She bore him 8 children. Mary Julia died December 20, 1928, age 87, at Provo, Utah, and was buried December 23rd in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Heber John died May 12, 1919, age 78, at Provo, Utah, and was buried May 15th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
Rhoda Ann Janetta Richards was born September 15, 1843, at Nauvoo, Hancock County, Illinois, and was married October 31st, 1863, in the Endowment House to Benjamin Franklin Knowlton. She bore him 10 children. He died March 27, 1901, age 63, at Farmington, Davis County, Utah, and was buried March 29th in the Farmington City Cemetery. Rhoda Ann died May 3, 1882, age 38, at Farmington, Davis County, Utah. Willard's first wife, Jeanette, died July 9, 1845, age 27, at Nauvoo, Hancock County, Illinois, and was buried Friday, July 11th, at Nauvoo. Willard Richards was married January 22, 1846, in the Nauvoo Temple to Amelia Elizabeth Pearson, daughter of William Pearson and Nancy Richards. She was born April 16, 1825, at Richmond, Berkshire, Massachusetts. They were the parents of one child, an unnamed son, born February 20, 1851, at Salt Lake City. He died the same day, having lived 12 hours. Amelia Elizabeth died February 23, 1851, aged 25, at Salt Lake City, and was buried February 25, 1851, in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
Willard Richards was married January 22, 1846, in the Nauvoo Temple to Sarah Longstreth. Sarah was born February 25th and christened March 5, 1826, at Arncliffe, Yorkshire, England. She bore him 4 children. Willard Brigham Richards was born January 25, 1847, at Winter Quarters, now Florence, Douglas County, Nebraska, and was married August 22, 1877, at Salt Lake City to Harriet Ann Fairbanks Doremus. She bore him 6 children. Harriet Ann died May 25, 1888, aged 36, at Salt Lake City, and was buried at Salt Lake City. Willard Brigham Richards was married June 5, 1889, to Mary Louisa Snellgrove. She bore him 6 children. Mary Louisa died January 26, 1952, aged 95, and was buried January 30th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Joseph Smith Richards was born October 4, 1848, at Black Fork of the Green River, Emery County, Wyoming, near Fort Bridger, and was married June 29, 1876, in the Endowment House to Louise Mariah Taylor. She bore him 8 children. Louise Mariah died November 16, 1935, age 78, at Salt Lake City, and was buried November 18th at Salt Lake City. Joseph died October 30th, 1914, age 66 at Salt Lake City, and was buried November 1st at Salt Lake City.
Sarah Ellen Richards was born August 25th, 1850 at Salt Lake City, and was married March 1st, 1868, in the endowment house to Joseph Fielding Smith. She bore him 11 children. President Smith died November 19th, 1918, age 80 at Salt Lake City, and was buried November 21st in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Sarah Ellen died March 22nd, 1915, age 64, at Salt Lake City, and was buried March 25th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Pauline Richards was born May 11th, 1853 at Salt Lake City, and was married November 15th, 1869, in the endowment house to Abraham Fairbanks Doremus. She bore him 7 children. He died May 10th, 1933 at Salt Lake City, and was buried May 12th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Pauline died September 21st, 1947, age 94 at Salt Lake City, and was buried September 23rd at the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Sarah Longstreth died January 26, 1858, age 31 at Salt Lake City, and is buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
Willard was married January 25, 1846, in the Nauvoo Temple to Nanny Longstreth. She was born April 15th and christened May 4th, 1828, at Arncliffe, Yorkshire, England. Nanny bore him 3 children.
Alice Ann Richards was born March 24th, 1849, at Salt Lake City, and was married May 30th, 1868, in the endowment house to Lot Smith. She bore him 9 children. Lot died June 21st, 1892, age 63, at Tuba City, Coconino County, Arizona, and was buried June 23rd at Farmington, Davis County, Utah. Alice Ann died June 17th, 1940, aged 91, at Fielding, Box Elder County, Utah, and was buried there June 20th. Mary Asenath Richards was born November 18, 1850, at Salt Lake City, and was married December 5, 1869, in the endowment house to Joel Grover. She bore him 7 children, and they had 1 adopted child. Joel died May 13, 1886, age 37, at Nephi, Juab County, Utah, and was buried there. Mary Asenath died 20 July 1915, age 64, at Salt Lake City, and was buried there.
Stephen Longstreth Richards was born July 29, 1853, at Salt Lake City, and was married August 15, 1878, in the endowment house to Emma Louise Stainer. She bore him 10 children. Emma Louise died Friday, September 17, 1937, age 79, at Salt Lake City, and was buried Monday, September 20th, in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Stephen L. died Monday, July 3, 1922, age 68, at Salt Lake City, and was buried Wednesday, July 5th, in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
Nanny Longstreth died January 7, 1911, age 82, at Salt Lake City, and was buried January 10th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
Willard Richards was married January 27, 1846, in the Nauvoo Temple to Mary Thompson. She was born October 21, 1827, at Alston, Cumberlandshire, England, and was christened there January 27, 1828. She bore him 2 children.
Phoebe Amelia Richards was born June 7, 1851, at Salt Lake City, and was married May 24, 1869, in the endowment house to Jacob Peart.
He was born July 1st and christened December 22nd, 1835 at Alston, Cumberlandshire, England. She bore him 7 children. Jacob died January 28, 1914, aged 78, at Salt Lake City, and was buried January 30th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Phoebe Amelia died January 15, 1943, aged 91, at Rupert, Minidoka County, Idaho, and was buried January 18th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery.
Janetta Richards was born October 22, 1854, at Salt Lake City. She died September 23, 1855, age 1, and is buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Mary Thompson died September 10, 1905, at Riverside, Box Elder County, Utah, and was buried September 12 in the Farmington City Cemetery.
Willard Richards was married January 31, 1846, in the Nauvoo Temple to Jane Hall. She was born February 18, 1826, at Chatburn, Whalley, Lancashire, England. They had no children. Jane died December 10, 1849, aged 23, at Salt Lake City, and was buried in Willard's garden. Willard Richards was married February 6, 1846, in the Nauvoo Temple to Susanna Lee. They had no children. Susanna was born May 19, 1808, at Pendleton, Clitheroe, Lancashire, England, and christened May 29, 1808, at Whalley, Lancashire. Susanna died December 27, 1872, aged 64, at Mill Creek, Salt Lake County, Utah, and was buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Willard Richards was married February 6, 1846, in the Nauvoo Temple to Anne Reed. They had no children. Anne died April 18, 1872, aged 78, at Salt Lake City, and was buried April 20th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Willard Richards was married December 22, 1847, to Susanna Bayless at Winter Quarters, Douglas County, Nebraska. Susanna was born May 31, 1812, at Lee, Worcestershire, England, and was christened June 21, 1812, at Lee. She bore him 1 child.
Mary Ann Richards was born December 7, 1851, at Salt Lake City, and was married May 30, 1868, in the endowment house to Elias Van Fleet. She bore him 10 children. Elias died June 11, 1920, age 81, at Farmington, Davis County, Utah, and was buried there June 14. Mary Ann died May 28, 1942, aged 90, at Layton, Davis County, Utah, and was buried June 1st in the Farmington City Cemetery. Susanna Bayless died April 17, 1891, at Farmington, Davis County, Utah, and was buried in the Farmington City Cemetery.
Willard Richards was married November 30, 1851, to Rhoda Harriet Foss at Salt Lake City. She bore him 1 child. Calvin Willard Richards was born October 7, 1852, at Salt Lake City, and was married December 24, 1872, at Farmington, Davis County, Utah, to Emma Irene Walker. She bore him 9 children. Emma Irene died September 4, 1893, aged 39, at Fielding, Box Elder County, Utah, and was buried September 7th in the Farmington City Cemetery. Calvin Willard Richards was married January 16, 1901, to Martha Louise Madsen, January 16, 1901, in the Salt Lake Temple. She bore him 4 children. Martha died September 17, 1948, age 82, at Brigham City, Box Elder County, Utah, and was buried September 21st in the Farmington City Cemetery. Calvin Willard Richards died October 3, 1926, age 73, at Salt Lake City, and was buried October 6th at Farmington.
Rhoda Harriet Foss died Saturday, November 19, 1881, age 51, at Farmington, Davis County, Utah, and was buried November 21st in the Farmington City Cemetery.
Willard Richards was sealed by proxy February 26, 1857, in the endowment house to Martha Faldo. She died about 1865 at Farmington, Davis County, Utah. Willard Richards was sealed by proxy October 27, 1869, in the endowment house to Mary Harrison. Willard Richards was sealed by proxy May 14, 1886, in the Logan Temple to Nancy Longstreth. She was born March 1st and christened April 6, 1817, at Arncliffe, Yorkshire, England. Nancy died August 14, 1839, aged 22, at Clitheroe, Lancashire, England, and was buried August 17th at Clitheroe. Willard Richards was sealed by proxy May 14, 1886, in the Logan Temple to Mary Longstreth. She was born May 8th and christened May 28, 1820, at Arncliffe, Yorkshire, England. Mary died March 7, 1840, aged 19, at Clitheroe, Lancashire, England, and was buried March 11th at Clitheroe. Willard was sealed by proxy September 28, 1888, in the Logan Temple to Marcia Maria Merrill. She died in September of 1853, aged 23.
Willard Richards was sealed by proxy June 9, 1893, in the Salt Lake Temple to Edna Sarah Hinman. She died February 25, 1896, age 67.
Total known posterity of Willard Richards as of 1993: 15 children, 112 grandchildren, 313 great-grandchildren, 863 second great-grandchildren, 1,099 third great-grandchildren, 213 fourth great-grandchildren, for a total posterity of 2,615. With 1,057 total spouses of children, grandchildren, etc., making a grand total of 3,672 total posterity, including spouses.
As descendants of these fine and faithful people, let us remember their strong, wonderful qualities and try to live our lives to make them proud of us.